Okay. So, good evening, everybody. Um, and the topic tonight is the tunnels under Chabad World Headquarters. What the heck is that all about? And it's one of the weirder stories, I think, in Jewish life, for a long time. So Monday night. So Monday night a week ago, and I assume everybody knows at least something about it because it's been all over the media. But there was basically a riot inside Chabad's main synagogue, which is at 770 Eastern Parkway in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. And I mean, if you've seen video, and I did attach some video to one of my emails, but it's really shocking. I mean, to see, yeshiva buchers wailing on the cops and the cops wailing on the yeshiva buchers and picking up benches and tables and throwing them at the police. There was video of somebody, of a yeshiva bucher coming up out of a sewer grate. I mean, the tunnels were connected to the sewers as well. A dozen people were arrested, on mostly misdemeanor charges, as far as I know. But what the heck was going on? Okay, and um, in fact, just an hour ago or so, my brother sent me a link to a story from New York Magazine, which I didn't have the chance to read, but it goes over and it talks about how this occurrence points up to the fact that there is a basic split in the Chabad Lubavitch movement. Okay, so um, and it's something that it has interested me for a long time. I've actually published like scholarly work on this subject back when I was, a think tank scholar rather than a pulpit rabbi. And so, um, for those of you who don't like history, I'm sorry, but there's a lot of history here that needs to be unpacked in order to really understand um, what's going on. Okay. So, first question, uh, who dug these tunnels and why? Okay, the who is easy to answer. They were started by a bunch of Chabad yeshiva buchers. Everybody knows what a yeshiva bucher is. I'm not using terminology that people don't know, right? Um, all those who were arrested were between the ages of 19 and 22. Almost all of them Israeli. Um, and so they started digging these tunnels a few months ago by themselves. Eventually decided that the same hands which study Talmud were not up to the hard physical work of digging tunnels under Brooklyn. So they went out and hired what they are saying Mexicans. Okay, now, if you live in Montgomery County, most of our Mexicans are actually Salvadoran. I don't know whether these Mexicans were actually Mexican, but um, they hired Latino day laborers to do the digging, and these people apparently actually lived in the tunnels as they were digging them. The tunnels came to light because neighbors heard the sound of digging under their houses. Okay. Which I would, I mean, of course, with everything that's going on in Gaza and whatnot, you hear tunnels and it's like, right? But at the same time, the fact of the matter is that if somebody's digging a tunnel under your house, you are probably going to hear it. And, you know, unlike what went on in Gaza, these people reported the digging to the authorities. Okay. And that's how the tunnels were discovered. And when they were discovered, um, the leadership of Chabad, which is, I mean, when the Rebbe died, nobody was appointed his successor, but there's an organization, there's Chabad has a legal structure. It's an American corporation, and their legal structure is called Agudas Hasidei Chabad, the Association of Chabad Hasidim, and it's headed by Rabbi Yehuda Krinsky. And Rabbi Krinsky called for a cement truck to fill in the tunnels. When the cement truck got there, the yeshiva bookers attacked the workers from the cement truck. Then the police were called, and that's how this whole thing, got out of hand, right? So we know who. We still don't know precisely why. Okay, and originally there was speculation, because if you remember at the beginning of the pandemic, right, houses of worship were closed, right? And so there's some, I mean, for Chabad Hasidim, 770 is a holy place. It's a holy place. There was some speculation that these tunnels were actually dug at the beginning of COVID so that people could go daven in 770, without trying to enter from the street into a building that theoretically was closed. But it turns out that that's most likely not the case. Okay, so the question of why, so there's some theory which I'll share with you when I get to it, but before then, I want to give a little bit of historic background. Okay, so the first thing, I mean, 770, like I said, 770 for Chabad people is a holy place because it was the Rebbe's shul. Originally, I mean, the Rebbe who I would say died, many Chabad Hasidim would actually take issue with the statement that the Rebbe died, but who died in 1994. So the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe had no sons, but he had two sons-in-law. And the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, who died in the late 50s, I think, wrote in his will that his son-in-law, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the previous Rebbe was Joseph Schneerson, but Joseph Schneerson and Menachem Mendel Schneerson were, I think, cousins. They weren't father and son. But Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who was the famous Lubavitcher Rebbe, died in 94, childless, and did not name a successor. But Joseph Schneerson, 770, was actually where he lived. When he passed away and Menachem Mendel Schneerson became the Rebbe, he did not live there. He lived around the corner in a different place, but that became his office and the headquarters of the Lubavitch movement, their publishing house, their shlichim office, their educational stuff, everything was headquartered in 770. And they dug out and built a fairly large synagogue that is actually in the basement of both 770 and the building next door, which they also bought, which is, I think, 788 Eastern Avenue. And the shul that this tunnel was tunneling into is under both 770 and 788. Okay, I will point out, by the way, I mean, conservative Jews, when we're like having, let's say, friendly, teasing conversations with Lubavitchers, right? So 770 is the headquarters of Lubavitch. If you would think of any place as the sort of world center of conservative Judaism, it would be JTS. The address of JTS is 3080 Broadway. Okay, 4 times 770 yields 3080. Okay, what to do with the so we say, of course, that proves that conservative Judaism is 4 times as holy as Chabad is. They would probably not agree with that, but it is an interesting piece of trivia that the address for JTS is exactly multiple of 4 for the address of Chabad. But I mean, Chabad is also, the 770 is an iconic building, and a number of Chabad centers throughout the world are replicas to a greater or lesser extent of 770. There's a 770 in El Paso, Texas. There's one in Brazil. They're all over the place. Very frequently, when they build a new Chabad center, they will design it architecturally, at least the facade, to look like 770. Now, there is a brick for brick, tile for tile copy of 770 in Kfar Chabad in Israel. Kfar Chabad is a Chabad, entirely Chabad village in Israel. And the replica of 770 there was built while the Rebbe was still alive. And there was speculation that, that's where he would live in Israel once the Messiah came and moved all the Jews to Israel, so that he would have a familiar place. And actually, if you know where it is, if you're driving or in a bus from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, if you know where it is, you can see it off in the distance, and it's kind of a bizarre sight to see this, Victorian Brooklyn building rising up out of a field in Israel. But there are replicas of it all over. Now, in the last few years before the Rebbe's death, there was a lot of, I'm going to use the term messianism, right? Talking about Mashiach. Mashiach is the Hebrew word for the Messiah. It means the anointed one. And I remember in Simchat Torah 1981. In Israel, Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah are the same day. But on the day that would be Simchat Torah in the diaspora, there is this custom in Israel of hakafot shniot, second hakafot, okay, that are just not really connected to a service. They're usually done publicly outdoors. And I was at the central hakafot shniot in Jerusalem, and that one hakafa was all Chabad Hasidim, and they're dancing around carrying the Torahs, and they're singing this song, which the MC said that the Rebbe had told them to sing this song. And it was in English, even though it was in Jerusalem. We want Mashiach now, we don't want to wait. It was great. We want Mashiach now, we don't want to wait. We want Mashiach. And, everyone's like, what the heck, right? But that was the first time that at least I knew of this Mashiach push. And they had signed, Mashiach is coming, be ready, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There was a lot of talk, well, maybe the Rebbe is Mashiach, right? Now, the thing that you have to understand is that, you know, Hasidism of any type is a Kabbalistic movement, right? They all follow one or another type of Kabbalah. And Chabad, Chabad and Lubavitch, two words are interchangeable. Chabad follows what's known as Lurianic Kabbalah. Okay, Lurianic Kabbalah means, and believe me, I am far from an expert on Lurianic Kabbalah or anything Hasidic. I mean, my family background is entirely Lithuanian, and the Lithuanians had no use for Hasidism, and the Hasidim had no use for the Lithuanians. So, if I ever say something that sounds antagonistic towards Hasidism, I come by it honestly. I inherit it. But Lurianic Kabbalah, named after Rabbi Isaac Luria, who lived in Sfat shortly after the expulsion from Spain, teaches, I don't have the time or the ability or knowledge even to go into it, from A to Z. But just like the Jews are in exile, the Shekhinah, God's indwelling presence, is also in exile. Okay, and there are divine sparks called nitzotzot. The divine sparks are trapped in the material world. Okay, everything that exists in the material world potentially has nitzotzot, divine sparks, within it. Okay, Jews have more, non-Jews have less, but even animals have divine sparks. For example, I mean, Chabad is dead set against vegetarianism. Okay, as an example. Why? Because every chicken, every cow has divine sparks in it. Okay, and when that animal is slaughtered in a kosher way and devoured by a Jew as part of a kosher meal, the divine sparks in that slaughtered animal are liberated and reunited with the Godhead. Okay, and who are we to prevent those divine sparks from being reunited with the Godhead, right? So by eating, now of course by eating treif, you're doing exactly the opposite, right? But every time, and that's why, they'll try to get you to put on tefillin even if you've never done it before and are never going to do it again, because every time, or a woman to light Shabbos candles or whatever, because every time a Jew does a mitzvah, these nitzotzot are released from the klipot and reunited with the Godhead. Okay, and at that point, when enough nitzotzot have been liberated from the klipot and reunited with the Godhead, Mashiach will come. Okay, nobody knows, but you could be the tipping point. You could be the tipping points. Somebody some Jewish woman who never lights Shabbos candles could light Shabbos candles this Friday, and that's the tipping point. Okay, it's what we call in theology theurgy. All right, theurgy is the idea that human beings can actually make God do something, right? I mean, just like, certain tribes believe that, if we do the rain dance right, it has to rain. right? If we do enough mitzvahs, God has no choice but to send the Messiah. I mean, and it's very inspiring. And this is, look, I mean, whatever my view of Chabad theology may or may not be, they're extremely dedicated because they really believe that they are bringing the Messiah, and they really believe, and they don't care. All right, I'll put on tefillin this one time. Don't expect me to do it every. That's fine. Do it the one time, right? Maybe that'll be enough. I'm not going to light Shabbos candle. Do it the one time. Maybe that'll be enough. And that's what motivates their outreach efforts. Dee, I see you have your hand.
Doesn't that equate, this may not come out right, doesn't that equate to the idea that the Messiah we were created by God to do good things, to make the world a good place,
Right.
and to treat each other in a humane way, or all living creatures? Doesn't that equate to the same kind of thing as and that the Messiah won't come until we have made the world ready for what God intended? Isn't that similar to the idea that all these sparks that are getting released? I'm not saying this well.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not unrelated. The idea that, you know, we don't just sit around on our butts waiting for the Messiah. We
Right,
pave
right,
the way,
right.
right? We pave the way, whether we pave the way by, you know, by working for fossil fuel reduction, or whether we pave the way by getting more Jewish men to put on tefillin, right? But the idea that, yeah, that I mean, for sure. I mean, Judaism in general, I think, is all about divine human partnership. We do our part, and God does God's part, right? And so that is what's going on here. Okay, so and you have to understand that Lurianic Kabbalah emphasis on doing mitzvot to release the sparks to bring Mashiach. Okay. Um, and, it's a very powerful idea. I mean, I happen not to share it, but it's a very, very powerful idea. Okay. So from the 80s to the early 90s, um, messianic fervor increased among Chabad. And then a year or two before he passed away, the Rebbe had a stroke. Um, and and they even staged a coronation. By that point, he was wheelchair bound and unable to speak. But they pushed him out on his wheelchair and up on the balcony, and they crowned him as Mashiach. All right. What did the Rebbe actually believe? We have no way of knowing. I mean, at that point, it was kind of sad, but he was not even able to communicate, right? But people, and I understand the feeling, how would God abandon us, right? And if the Rebbe has no children and therefore no natural, obvious successor, how would God leave us without the kind of leadership that we need? So therefore, the Rebbe must be the Messiah. All right, and people outside the community were really worried what would happen when the Rebbe died. Okay, would it be another Jonestown movement? Would people, kill themselves? Would people leave Chabad? Whatever. But in fact, the opposite happened. I mean, Chabad is stronger and bigger now than it ever was. Right? It keeps growing and growing and growing. And if we ever, for example, create an Earth settlement on Mars, the people who land on Mars, there'll already be a Chabad there. There's no question about it. But, so then the question is, all right, so if the Rebbe dies, right, then what does this mean about the Rebbe being Mashiach, right? And here there's a lot of controversy, right? I mean, presumably there are people who would say, we thought the Rebbe was Mashiach, and then he died. So obviously we were wrong. He's not Mashiach. He wasn't Mashiach, right? I mean, that would be certainly not an irrational conclusion, right? But many people said, no, in point of fact, the Mashiach can die and then come back and finish the work that he started, that he did not conclude prior to his death, right? And if the idea of a Messiah who died but is going to come back sounds familiar, right? Does that sound like any religion that you know, right? I mean, to the extent where every once in a while you'll see Jews for Jesus put up a billboard with a picture of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and and says, "Right idea, wrong person," right? Because most, I'm going to say, normal Jews look and they say, and I mean, there is nothing in any authoritative Jewish source that says the Messiah can die and then come back to finish the job. All right. It's just, I mean, Maimonides quite explicitly rules that out. And he says, if somebody appears to be the Messiah and dies before the world is fully redeemed, he wasn't the Messiah. Okay. But, now we start to tread on dicey ground, right? Because I would say this, and the mainstream leadership, by which I mean Rabbi Krinsky and Agudas Hasidei Chabad, will never say flat out the Rebbe was the Mashiach. All right, they'll say we hope he was or whatever. But I also believe that you will never get a Chabad rabbi to say flat out that the Lubavitcher Rebbe was not Mashiach. All right, I have challenged people who challenge me on my assertion that Messianism is more widespread than most people believe. I say, go to your Chabad rabbi and ask him to state flat out that Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson died in 1994 and he wasn't the Messiah. Okay, and I've yet to hear a Chabad rabbi be willing to say that, right? Which leads people to conclude that the dispute within Chabad is not about whether the Rebbe was or wasn't the Messiah. It's about whether it's wise or not to proclaim that he was. Okay, now, why would the mainstream leadership of Chabad say, you know what, let's cool it with the Mashiach stuff? Because it looks nuts, right? To most people, it looks nuts. And it looks like, like I said, another major world religion with which, we don't have the greatest track record. Yeah, Sue.
I just have a question. What did he do, or what did he stand for that anyone would think that he should be the Messiah?
Well, there's no question that he brought a lot of people back to observance, right? Or there's no question. I mean, the Chabad houses, and he started that, right? He started that, and they go to places where nobody else will go, and they work under conditions that nobody else would work under, and they get a lot of Jews to do a lot of mitzvahs. There's no question about it. And like the main place to go to if you have Jewish prisoners who need Bibles and Sidurim and whatever, Chabad takes care of that. I mean, does that qualify him as the Mashiach? I don't think so, but there's no doubt that he was one of the 3 or 4 most significant Jewish leaders in the past century. There's no question. I mean, he accomplished massive things, or things were accomplished, massive things were accomplished under his leadership. There's no question about that. I mean, to me, that doesn't qualify him as Mashiach, but people, whatever. Mike.
Yeah, it's a question of definition. Susie, the specific answer to your question is that it was Rabbi Schneerson who looked at Chabad at the time, which was a totally internal cloister, and said, there's something wacko about what I'm seeing. We have all this knowledge and we don't share it with the other Jews of the world. And he personally created this movement. It didn't used to be. And when I was a little kid and we passed a Hasid in Brooklyn on the street, and I asked my father, who's that? And he said, not to worry, they're there and we're here, and it's that way. Because the Hasidic movement was not looking for proselytizing. They were into their thing. And that Chabad, that's what they did. They were into their thing. And he said, this is wacko. There's all these Jews in the world who aren't Jewish, and we should be going out and making them more Jewish. And it was a personal thing that turned into this huge movement. So then you get to the question of, so what does it take to be a Mashiach? I mean, we opened the door on Seder night for Eliyahu Hanavi, who we believe is going to be the Mashiach.
Well, no, going to announce the Mashiach.
Huh?
Announce the Mashiach. He's not
Announce. Fine.
Right.
But the fact is that meanwhile, there's this guy who count the number of Chabad centers around the universe, the planet today, and put the credit where it belongs. I mean, it was an enormous undertaking out of Nowheresville, and suddenly there's a Chabad all around the world. So then it becomes a question of how you define the word Mashiach. It means messenger, I think, yeah?
No, it means anointed. Yeah, no, but the Mashiach is supposed to bring world peace and end the persecution of the Jews and so on and so forth, which he clearly didn't do, which clearly, Yehoshua ben Yosef of Nazareth also didn't do. So the Christians redefined the job and said, well, the first time around, it's a spiritual redemption, but he'll come back. And then it'll be the more tachlis redemption, right? And then that's what the Chabad messianists also say, most of them. All right, to the extent how widespread it is, I don't know. I mean, my own well, whatever. I don't know how widespread it is, but I think it is more widespread than people generally acknowledge. D.
I go back to the remarks that you made about the sparks being released and tie it to actions by Chabadniks with whom I have associated. And what I've learned was that one of the main missions was not the idea of conversion, but of returning. And for example, they will come, I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but they occasionally come to me or to Toby on Shabbat with a loaf of challah and a bottle of wine. On Purim, they'll come with appropriate accoutrements. They're very mindful because of word of mouth of people who study with them, friends and neighbors, whenever there is a need for a Shiva minyan, and they will come to support that without even being asked. I could go on and on with their list, but my point is, it would seem to me, again, trying to make a connection, that every one of those actions, every one of those deeds is an igniting of trying to get people involved and committed, not necessarily converting them to any higher level of Judaism, but rather mitzvot, that it's almost the concept of pay it forward or play it forward, however that goes.
No, I think you're right. I mean, they're not, I mean, certainly if somebody wanted to become like
right,
Mamash, uh, uh, Lubavitch Hasid,
right,
that's fine, but that's not their goal. Their
right,
goal is not
right,
to have you, you know, quit your job and sit and learn in a yeshiva full time and grow a long beard and wear all black. I mean, if you do, that's fine, but that's not the goal. The goal is simply
right,
to get Jews to do more mitzvahs,
right,
to release more sparks, to hasten the arrival
right,
of Mashiach. Okay, so the mainstream of Chabad downplays messianism. Okay, but there are other tendencies within Chabad. All right. Like I said, he didn't fulfill his mission. At some point, he will return from the dead, but others believe that he is still alive, but not visible. And rather than talking about his death, they talk about his histalkut, which means disappearance. He went away. Okay. And the most, so you have this phenomenon. I mean, and if you don't travel a lot, you may not notice it, right? But if you go to any place on the globe that is frequented by lots of Israeli travelers, right? Because when you are Israeli, when you finish the army, the like normative thing to do is to take 6 months or a year or 2 years and backpack around the world, right? So there is a Chabad, for example, in Kathmandu, right? The largest Pesach Seder in the world is held in Kathmandu every year. Who is the Chabad in Kathmandu for? Young Israelis who go there to study mysticism, meditation, etc. Okay. There's an island off the coast of Cancun called Isla Mujeres, which is also known by many as Israel Mujeres, because there are so many young Israelis. Okay. Playa del Carmen also is a place. And in Playa and in Cozumel, for example, there are 2 Chabads. Okay, why are there 2 Chabads in Playa? Because there's an American Chabad and an Israeli Chabad.
Oh my God.
Okay, and it's not just that one serves American tourists and one serves Israelis. Okay, it's that they have totally different ideologies. Okay, because Israeli Chabad is messianist through and through. Okay, and they absolutely 100% proclaim the Rebbe as Mashiach. Right? And if you see, I mean, go somewhere and you see posters with a picture of the Rebbe that says, "Welcome Mashiach," or you see those yellow flags with a crown and it says Moshiach, that's all Israeli Chabad. Okay, it could be Israeli Chabad here in America, right? Because there's like a Chabad in Rockville that serves Israelis. Right? There's a Chabad in Baltimore that serves Russians, right? I mean, so Israeli Chabad and American Chabad is not just a geographic distinction, it's also an ideological distinction, right? Although, again, whether there's really a difference in belief or it's simply a difference in PR strategy, nobody can tell you except those who are inside and they ain't talking, right? But so now you get back to 770, okay, and it started a few years after the Rebbe died or went away, okay, and the mainstream of Chabad, Agudas Hasidei Chabad, put up a plaque on 770, which referred to the Lubavitcher Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson of blessed memory. Okay, which is absolute heresy to the more overt messianists who believe that he's still alive. So how can you put a blessed memory? So the plaque was put up and vandals came in the middle of the night and took it down. And it was put up again and taken down and so on and so forth. And finally, Agudas Hasidei Chabad went to court, went to civil court, which, you know, is a big deal because Jews are not supposed to take other Jews to civil court. Right, and the courts of the state of New York have proclaimed in many decisions that 770 belongs to Agudas Hasidei Chabad, but tachlis, physically, the basement shul is still controlled by the Messianists, by the Israeli Messianists. Okay, and you know, thus we get and you can see, for example, I mean, there is videos of people bringing the Rebbe wine and challah to bless because he's still alive. He's there. He's just invisible, right? And so the people who are in physical control of the basement synagogue are Israeli hardcore messianists, some of them with like criminal backgrounds who, you know, come to Brooklyn to learn. Okay, now so it's widely believed. Okay, so first of all, I mean, and this is a fact, the shul is too small, right? I mean, Chabad is probably 10 times the size it was when the Rebbe died, right? And every Lubavitcher Chassid wants to daven in 770. It is too small, right? The question of how you enlarge a shul that is in a basement of two buildings that with other, right? I mean, it's not so simple, right? So nothing has been done. So, but the most likely explanation for the tunnels, which is why the people who dug them refused to leave even when the police ordered them to do so, is that they said, we're carrying out the Rebbe's wishes, right? We're expanding 770, right? Which makes perfect sense, right? Because if you get back to Chabad's theurgistic beliefs, right, that by doing X, we can make God do Y, right? That if we start the process by ourselves of enlarging 770, it will be impossible to stop that process. Okay? Obviously, they were wrong, right? And the NYPD and Agudas Hasidei Chabad did stop that process, but that the most likely explanation for the tunnels is young Israeli Chabadniks believing that they were carrying out the will of the Rebbe and starting the process of expanding 770. So now you're starting to see articles like the one my brother sent me that Chabad really has to deal with, that they really have to deal with this, that they can't, allow these messianists to just, have free reign and use violence and so on and so forth, that it is a real internal problem that, Chabad is going to have to solve. And I've seen a lot of shlichim even, if you go on YouTube and you type 770, you see, Rabbi Krinsky and the others were derelict in not stamping this out sooner. And now it's gotten out of control and something needs to be done, right? But there's no like central authority. I mean, you had, for example, during the pandemic, Chabad shlichim in various places willing to write, a religious exemption from vaccines for anybody who asked, right? And the movement said, stop it. And they said, we raise our own funds, right? Because, there's this erroneous belief that a lot of people have that Chabad houses are funded centrally by the movement. They're not. When they send out a young couple to start a Chabad house, they send them out with 2 years of seed money. And when the 2 years are over, you're on your own, right? Which also means that, they can tell you, we're revoking your franchise. But, Chabad is not like a registered trademark. I mean, if I want to open up an ice cream store and call it Baskin Robbins can prevent me. If we decide tomorrow to change the name of our shul from Kehilat Shalom to Liberal Chabad or Progressive Chabad of Montgomery Village, Rabbi Rachik will be upset, but there's not really anything that he could do. So they're not as centralized a movement, as we sometimes imagine they are. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Dee, I saw again you had your hand up, which is, it's down now, but if you have.
This is just a really wild comment. I wasn't sure where you were going when you were talking about the building of the tunnels underneath and the turmoil that it caused on top and no central yada, yada, yada. But it dawned on me that there's some kind of similarity between, after all the archaeology and excavation, the battles between Israel and the Muslim community with the temple on the mount and the what do they call where Muhammad is supposed to be on the top?
Yeah, the Dome of the Rock.
Yeah, seems there's some similarities, if nothing else, metaphorically.
I'm
Can,
I usually follow what you're, but I'm not sure that I do.
I'm thinking more like constant battling, constant
Oh,
control.
right. A holy place claimed by
Exactly.
two different camps.
Exactly.
You don't have to go to the Dome of the Rock. I mean, go to the Tomb of the Patriarchs in Hebron,
Right, exactly.
right, which is literally both a shul and a mosque,
Right.
right? Because
you a while,
Abraham
Took you a while.
by us was the first Jew, by them was the first Muslim,
Took you a
right?
while.
So what?
It took you a while.
Right. No, for sure. But, I mean, the biggest problem with these tunnels is that they undermine the foundations of several other buildings.
Right.
They were not built, again, if you know Hasidic culture, building without a permit is not seen as such a terrible thing, right? But, they were not properly shored up. And they could have, I mean, it seems 770 it was closed for a few days, but the city building inspectors, it's open again now, but many of the surrounding buildings are still closed, and some of them may have to be demolished because the structural whatever, I mean, architecture is one of many things I know nothing about. But has been sufficiently undermined that it's a real problem. And it could have been, a much bigger disaster. I mean, primarily it turned out to be like a PR black eye for Chabad, but it could have been much, much worse. All right. Anybody else? Yeah, Sue, and then Wendy.
I'm just curious, do you think there's a chance that the two parts of Chabad might separate into two separate and distinct groups?
I mean, I think de facto they already have.
Yeah.
I mean, when, like I say, when you go to a town and there's two Chabad houses, and I'm not talking about one in Rockville and one in Gaithersburg and one in Germantown. I'm talking, within a block of each other, right? And I mean, Starbucks does that, but most don't, right? De facto, they are already separate, right? In the same way that 200 years after Jesus, right? I mean, and that's why for somebody like me, this whole story is fascinating because it seems to replicate Christian origins, right? I mean, and there is no doubt that for quite some time after Jesus's death, Christianity was a sect of Judaism, right? And at a certain point, Christianity was no longer a sect of Judaism, right? But where exactly, how do you date that and define that split is a controversial topic among scholars of Christian origins, right? De facto, American Chabad and Israeli Chabad are different organizations with different ideologies, right? At what point will everybody sort of recognize and acknowledge it? I mean, in some ways they do. If you ask a mainstream Chabad rabbi about some crazy messianic offshoot somewhere, they'll say, "Oh, they're not really Chabad; they just use the name." Right? So, I mean, I think de facto they have indeed already split. Yeah, Wendy.
So what would happen? I mean, given that some structures around that area have already been undermined by those tunnels, and somebody decides, hey, I need recompense because my building is no longer habitable, who do they sue?
Good question.
It's a great question. I mean, look, the answer is you sue everybody, right? Who might, you know, reasonably be held responsible for it. I mean, there's no point in suing the Israeli yeshiva bookers who actually did it, right? They don't have any money, right? So I would probably, I mean, and again, you know, I know more about law than I do about architecture, but still, you know, I am neither a lawyer nor the son of a lawyer, but I would say probably sue Agudas Hasidei Chabad, because even if they didn't do it, they were negligent in
Yeah.
not asserting control over the space that they own,
But what
right? And
about vandalism?
if you own a piece of real estate and you allow it to become a dangerous nuisance, there's liability, right?
Yeah.
And there's money. I mean, there's money there. There's certainly more money with Agudas Hasidei Chabad than with these 12 Israeli yeshiva bookers. So I would imagine they're probably, you know, sue Chabad, but I don't know. Yeah. All right. Anybody else? Great. Then good night. Thank you, everybody. Shabbat
Thank
Shalom,
you.
and
Thank you.
Thank you.
hope it doesn't snow because I got stuff to do.
Carolyn, I'm sorry that we didn't
Thank you.
recognize you at last night's
Shabbat
meeting.
shalom.
Please come back.